Hello everyone tonight. We quietly slip into one of the most chilling final chapters of European royal history, where the candlelight fades in a cold palace, and a woman who once held the fate of France in her hands is slowly dying in silence, unnoticed even by the very dynasty she once ruled. Catherine de Medici, a name that once made nobles shudder, mother of 3 kings, rumored to be a witch, a poisoner, and the Queen of Shadows, whispered across Europe. But you know what? Her death was not a bloody epic, nor a glorious end for a powerful woman. It was a quiet, cold, and nearly forgotten death, terrifying in its utter lack of care. A queen who once commanded the entire court died in loneliness, collapse, and cursed by the very country she once led. Just hearing that sends chills down your spine, doesn't it? What about you? Would you have survived in her place? So before you lie down and truly relax, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if what I'm telling you gave you goosebumps, even just a little. Oh, and where are you right now? What city? What country? How late is it over there? Comment below. Let me know where in the world you're joining me from as we enter the deep of night together. Now, turn off the lights. Let the fan hum gently in the background, and let's descend into tonight's journey. Catherine de Medici lay dying in a cold room of the Château de Blois, once the heart of royal power in France, now merely a hollow shell, echoing with tired footsteps and whispers slipping through heavy dark curtains. She lay there, hands curled from rheumatism, her body depleted by lingering fevers and vague abdominal pains that physicians of the time could only describe as rotting innards. But what sent chills down one's spine wasn't the illness. It was the atmosphere in the room, that strange sensation, as if an entire era was holding its breath, waiting for her to die so it could be released. There were no courtiers gathered, no state mourning being arranged, no one waiting for the Queen Mother's final command. Just a few loyal servants quietly dabbing her forehead with warm cloths, and a nun occasionally reading soft verses of scripture, more like a lullaby, not for peace but for a dying dynasty. You see, Catherine was once an untouchable force. She ruled in place of sons too young to understand politics, arranged marriages to keep the crown out of the hands of rival faiths, and even gave the green light to the bloodiest massacre in the history of European religious conflict, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. But now no one protected her, no one wept, no one condemned, no one honored, only silence. She knew this, and it was that awareness, that chilling clarity within a decaying body, that was the real nightmare. Day by day, hour by hour, Catherine could feel the Valois dynasty she had spent her life preserving unraveling. Her youngest son, Henry III, was still alive, but only a shadow of a king. Around him swirled estranged courtiers, radical priests, and a Paris descending into chaos under the banners of competing faiths. Catherine sighed, not from pain, but from helplessness. She had once orchestrated political marriages like chess moves, sacrificed her daughters into loveless unions in exchange for a few years of fragile peace. She had sat in the shadows while noblemen raged only to strike once they thought she had surrendered. And still, everything fell apart. Not because she was weak, but because the era had shifted. Have you ever imagined what it feels like to witness your entire life, every victory, every sacrifice, every calculation swept away? Like sand by the winds of a new political age, Catherine felt that more keenly than anyone. The young at court no longer listened to her. They feared her like a ghost. They whispered about Italian poisons, encoded letters, strange scents in her chambers. The rumors spread faster than scripture. And like all rumors, they didn't need to be true, just terrifying enough to survive. What happened next, you ask? A silence that lasted for months. Catherine no longer appeared at court. She wrote letters, no one replied. She issued commands only a few aging officials obeyed. She proposed negotiations, marriages, peace deals, but everyone looked at her as the end of an era they were desperate to bury. Once it was said she looked into the mirror in her room and asked, "Has all the blood I spilled been enough to keep the throne?" No one answered, perhaps because no one dared. Perhaps because that question was meant for history alone. In her final month, Catherine barely spoke. She left a few notes about the royal treasury, unpaid military wages, the need to send envoys to Spain. But there was no one left to receive them. Henry III was too consumed by crisis to govern, and the others only wanted the coffin sealed quickly. On January 5, 1589, Catherine de' Medici died. No drums, no cannons, no state funeral. Her body was wrapped in a few layers of cloth and placed temporarily in a small chapel at Blois because Paris refused to allow her burial in the royal crypt. They said she was unworthy. They called her the Witch Queen. But in truth, they were afraid. Because she was too clear a mirror of a past France wished to forget. And perhaps the horror of Catherine's death wasn't in its violence, but in its unbearable silence. A woman who once made all of Europe tremble. A mother who sacrificed everything to protect the throne for her sons. A queen who ruled through 3 reigns amidst chaos and bloodshed. Passed away without anyone mentioning her. It's not death that frightens people. It's when history itself chooses silence. But perhaps to understand how a small Italian woman became the royal-faced fear of France for 3 decades, you have to go back in time. A little further to Florence in 1519. Don't worry, no passport needed, just keep your blanket warm and your imagination sharp. Where you're born doesn't matter. But Catherine de' Medici was born in the middle of a crisis. She came into the world in a quiet villa while outside the Italian wars and political schemes boiled like a Renaissance pressure cooker. The baby girl was the daughter of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, a direct descendant of the wealthiest banking dynasty in Europe at the time. Yes, that Medici family. The ones who sponsored the entire Renaissance, from Michelangelo to those haunting paintings you stare at in museums. Her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, was French nobility, with Bourbon blood sounding every bit royal and powerful. In today's language, Catherine was the child of a super account and certified noble bloodline. But life as usual didn't go the Disney fairy tale route. Just weeks after Catherine's first cry, her mother died from postpartum fever. Her father quietly followed, no one's really sure from what. Some say malaria, others say syphilis. And some skip over the detail because it's a bit much before dinner. So Catherine was orphaned, but not in the taken in and lived happily ever after kind of way. No, my friend. She became a political asset. To the Medici, she was a bloodline worth protecting. To their enemies, a symbol to be suppressed. When Florence fell into the hands of the anti-Medici Republicans, Catherine, just 8 years old, was taken hostage. Something feels very wrong when you're just learning to read and already dealing with regime change, doesn't it? They didn't lock her in a dungeon. No, they placed her in convents. A kind of soft captivity, but imprisonment all the same. From one convent to another, Catherine was moved constantly to avoid uprisings in her name. Not allowed peace yet, not permitted to vanish. Imagine a child cut off from all familiarity, living behind stone walls with morning prayers and nightly fear as her only constants. Historians still debate whether Catherine was treated harshly in those convents. Some records describe a relatively decent life, proper education, courtly manners, discipline. Others hint at darker scenes, freezing stone walls, candles burning through the night, and drunken guards whispering in the shadows. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Those years of being politically forgotten left a deep mark on the soul of young Medici. No one survives a childhood like that without learning a few lessons about power, survival, and just how valuable silence can be. Catherine grew up in silence, but every glance, every gesture, every morning prayer was etched into her memory like strategy. Some called it defensive living. Others, especially later, called it the sign of someone capable of manipulating at a national level. Who's to say? The Medici family, like a wounded snake, refused to die. When Emperor Charles V recaptured Florence and returned power to the Medici-aligned faction, Catherine was released. Not to go home and play with dolls, but to be immediately married off. Pope Clement VII. Catherine's uncle was in quite the bind. You see, popes don't have children, but they do know how to arrange marriages. And Catherine, with her Medici and Bourbon bloodlines, was a marriage card of immense value. The result, that little girl from Florence, who once slept beside prayer books and cold brick pillows, was now married off to Henry, Duke of Orleans. A Frenchman, a prince, a man who didn't love her. That royal wedding wasn't a fairy tale. No roses, no romantic candlelight, no "you're the one." Only Henry's indifferent gaze toward his new wife and Catherine's polite smile, knowing she had entered the palace but not necessarily anyone's heart. Ah yes, a small but intriguing detail. Henry was infatuated with his mistress Diane de Poitiers far more than with Catherine. And Diane was over 20 years older than Catherine. You might be thinking, oh, a medieval love triangle, but really it was more like a French court drama series before Netflix. Intense, icy, and no one got what they truly wanted. And that was Catherine's starting point. Not from the throne, but from the depths of long hallways, where a small Italian girl learned how to smile when ignored, learned how to stay silent when isolated, and learned how to observe deeply so that one day when others looked up, they'd realize she knew too much and they knew nothing about her. You see, there's one truth that never changes in royal history. If you're a woman and can't bear children, you're nearly invisible. And that was exactly where Catherine de' Medici found herself after her wedding. For the first 10 years at the French court, Catherine bore no children. No prince, no princess, no heir to hope for. And in a court obsessed with lineage and filled with scrutinizing eyes, that was like wearing the label "discarded queen" on her forehead. Her husband Henry made no effort to hide his affection for his mistress Diane de Poitiers, an older, sharp-tongued lady who unsurprisingly didn't care much for Catherine. Gossip at the time claimed Diane controlled correspondence court decisions, and even King Henry's signature once he ascended the throne. Simply put, Catherine wore the crown, but Diane held the keys to power. And Catherine? She merely smiled, learned to walk slowly across marble halls without making a sound, and quietly swallowed every rumor like a bitter pill each day. And you know what? She didn't cry. Or if she did, no one ever saw it. Historians still debate one curious point. Was Catherine truly infertile during those 10 early years of marriage, or was Henry simply biologically incompatible with her? Some records suggest it was only thanks to medical intervention at the time, including a curious remedy from a Jewish physician who used herbs and breath exercises, sounding suspiciously like a royal spa treatment, that Catherine unexpectedly began to conceive. And so, from 1544 to 1556, Catherine gave birth to 10 children in succession, a number that would make modern mothers want to apologize to themselves for complaining about raising 2. Of those 10, 7 survived into adulthood, a miracle in those days, when most infants didn't make it through their first winter. Each childbirth further solidified Catherine's position within the royal family. She no longer had to fight for power, she gave birth to power. And soon after, when her husband became King Henry II, Catherine officially became the Queen of France. Still ignored at banquets, still sidelined in court matters by her husband's mistress, but her eyes quietly followed everyone. Then a twist of fate in 1559, King Henry II was gravely injured during a celebratory joust for their daughter's wedding. The lance pierced his eye, then his brain. No doctor, no astrologer, no healer could save him. Henry II died in agony, and Catherine, for the first time in her life, was no longer obscured by a man. Her eldest son, Francis II, took the throne at just 15, but real power fell into the hands of the Guise family, one of the most radical Catholic factions in France. Catherine was pushed aside once again. More condescending looks, more whispers in cold stone corridors. But this time she didn't stand still. Through careful diplomacy, feigned weakness, and an unyielding attention to every word and alliance within the court, Catherine began placing her allies throughout the palace. When Francis II died just a year later, Catherine seized her opportunity. Her next son, Charles IX, was only 10 years old. And this time, she officially became Regent of France. Sounds like a standard promotion. Hardly. At the time, for a woman, an Italian woman rumored to practice witchcraft and poisoning to be given full control over France was unheard of. But Catherine did it. Through patience, through her children, and through an ability to see farther than the men drunk on their own power. Oh. And here's a fun little detail you might enjoy. Catherine was the one who brought gelato from Italy to France. It was she who introduced the French royal court to this frozen dessert, so if you're eating strawberry ice cream at 2 a.m. today, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to her. From a forgotten bride, Catherine rewrote her own role in history with black ink and political blood. And this was only the beginning. The religious storms, the civil wars, the assassinations, and the bloodiest massacre in French history all still lay ahead. Have you ever heard the phrase, balancing on a tightrope is an art? For Catherine, that rope was France, and beneath her wasn't a soft net, but a sea of gleaming spears. On one side were the radical Catholics, led by the Guise family, powerful, numerous, and ready to slaughter every heretic. On the other side were the Calvinist Protestant nobles, Huguenots, wealthy, armed, and furious at being persecuted. Now imagine you're a mother, caught between those two extremes, expected to please the court, maintain peace, protect your son, and not make a single mistake. No pressure, right? As soon as Catherine became regent, she chose the path of moderation, or as it's often called, walking a tightrope in a storm. She invited both Catholics and Huguenots to negotiation tables, held theological dialogues, and issued the Edict of January 1562, allowing Protestants to worship freely outside city walls. An act of courage or foolishness, depending on which side of history you stand. Some modern historians praise this as the first bold step toward religious tolerance in Europe. But the Catholic nobility didn't see it that way. They didn't see tolerance, they saw betrayal. Just weeks after the edict, the first storm struck. In the town of Vassy, soldiers under the Duke François de Guise attacked a group of Huguenots holding a service in a barn. They threw torches, killed everyone, and declared it punishment for heresy. Around 50 people died, many others were burned alive. It was the beginning of the First War of Religion. And what do you think Catherine did next? Did she crush one side completely? No. She kept negotiating, kept issuing edicts of reconciliation, kept arranging symbolic marriages between the children of both factions. She played a game of chess, where every move risked setting off a massacre. One of those chess pieces was Marguerite de Valois, Catherine's daughter. In 1572, she arranged the marriage between Margot and Henry of Navarre, leader of the Huguenots, a man who would later become Henry IV of France. A wedding that on the surface symbolized reconciliation. But beneath it was a Pandora's box. All over Paris, Huguenots flocked to attend the wedding. Thousands of them, including Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, their military leader. The streets filled with songs, fireworks, and the hateful gazes from high balconies where Catholic soldiers watched every move. Then, just days after the wedding, Coligny survived an assassination attempt. A bullet pierced his shoulder, but he lived. That was the breaking point. The Huguenots suspected the crown wanted to wipe them out. Catherine panicked. Historians still debate to this day. Was it Catherine who gave the order for what came next? Some sources say she intended to kill a few leaders to prevent an uprising. Others argue she was pressured by military leaders into a no-way-out scenario. Whoever it was, whatever the plan, on the night of August 23, 1572, a nightmare began. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Royal soldiers, along with Catholic militias, flooded the streets of Paris. They killed Coligny and threw his body out the window. And then, like madness, unleashed blood poured through the city. From nobles to common Huguenots, no one was spared. Homes were smashed, children dragged into streets, women executed on the spot. There was no longer any targeted killing. It became a full-scale slaughter lasting days, then spreading to other cities. Lyon, Rouen, Bordeaux, modern estimates say, between 5,000 and 10,000 people were killed. But some sources claim the true number was even higher. You're listening late at night, so I won't go into detail. But imagine streets glowing red in candlelight and prayers drowned out by the clash of steel. The next morning, Catherine stepped out of the palace, and the scent of blood and smoke still lingered in the Parisian wind. And she didn't cry. She just stayed silent. Because she knew from that moment she was no longer a mediator. She had become a symbol of terror. Whether or not she gave the order, her name would forever be tied to the massacre. Protestant poets called her the Bloody Queen. English clergy described her as a demon in a crown. In satirical prints, she was drawn pouring poison into wine, standing in shadow with emotionless eyes. You see, Catherine didn't fight with swords. She used promises, fear, and silence as political weapons. But once blood is spilled, no one asks who gave the order, who didn't. They just need a name to blame. And that name was hers. From that day on, Catherine was no longer the woman who walked between both shores. She was pushed to one side, the side of darkness, and the price she paid was her very soul. If you think Catherine de' Medici was the type to order public beheadings in the town square, you'd be wrong. She didn't like blood staining her velvet gowns. Catherine didn't remove enemies with a blade, but with a glance, a dinner invitation, or a well-intentioned arranged marriage. Sounds polite? Well, that's exactly what made it terrifying. After the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, Catherine did not retreat from politics. On the contrary, she became sharper than ever. She understood better than anyone that to survive, she couldn't simply compromise with the factions. She had to manipulate them, one by one. And if there was one weapon she favored most in her arsenal, it was marriage. You know the love means marriage trope from dramas. For Catherine, it was use the people I gave birth to in order to bind my enemies. She arranged marriages like a diplomat plays chess, placing each of her children exactly where they needed to be, not for happiness, but for strategy. No heart was safe under her crown. Marguerite, her beautiful daughter, was married off to Henry of Navarre, a Huguenot leader. At first, people thought, oh, perhaps this is love as reconciliation. But no, it was a trap that led to the bloodshed of St. Bartholomew. After that wedding, Catherine continued forcing her remaining children to marry potential enemies or nobles whose loyalty was wavering. Couldn't marry them off, she isolated them. If they resisted, she did the only thing a medieval mother could do. She made them disappear from court for a few months or a few years. Some never returned. There's a little-known detail, but some records of the time mention that Catherine had a special group of ladies-in-waiting called the Escadron Volant, or Flying Squadron. Not soldiers, no wings, but a group of young, beautiful, clever women trained to seduce. That's right, spies in silk dresses. They didn't assassinate. They eavesdropped, seduced noblemen, extracted secrets from velvet-covered beds, then quietly vanished with a soft laugh. Catherine used them as her eyes and ears, sending them into meetings, banquets, private chambers. Every whisper, every betrayal plotted, every weakness in an enemy's heart was reported back to the queen. Historians still debate the official nature of this group. Some argue it was just exaggerated rumor by chroniclers who hated Catherine. But the encrypted letters, the late-night encounters, and the curious number of nobles who slipped up and lost their positions are enough to make anyone uneasy. And you know what made Catherine more terrifying than any king? She never needed to kill publicly. Her enemies often destroyed themselves. Humiliated, pushed out of court, made to distrust one another, and then one day, they'd fall from a horse on a hunt or drink a cup of wine just a little too strong. No proof, no witnesses, no accusations. Only the silence after the banquet. Some modern scholars argue Catherine couldn't have ordered each of those deaths. Maybe that's true, but in politics, as you know, fear is sometimes more effective than action. A court where no one's sure if they'll leave the dinner table alive is a court very easy to control. And Catherine, she never confessed. She didn't deny either. She just sat there silent like the darkness in a locked room. You see, Catherine's politics weren't about right or wrong. They were about who survives. A strange thing, though, for all her scheming, she still kept the loyalty of many generals, courtiers, and astrologers. Yes, Catherine believed in astrology. She had her own circle of seers, star readers, and even people who crafted elixirs from strange herbs. You might chuckle. But to Catherine, the auspicious date for signing an edict was no joke. And if a planet was slightly misaligned, a negotiation might be postponed for a few days, just to be sure. This only made her enemies more suspicious. And in a France already teetering on the edge of religious hysteria, rumors of a witch queen spread faster than any call for reform. They said whenever Catherine entered a room, the air grew colder by a few degrees. Her eyes didn't look at you, they looked through you, as if she already knew what you were about to think before you even opened your mouth. And perhaps she truly did. There's something strange about powerful women in history. The more discreet they are, the more people want to know what they've been hiding. And Catherine de' Medici was a velvet-draped stone wall, cold thick, but full of mystery behind it. Throughout her life, there's no official record confirming that Catherine ever had a lover. No public affairs, no passionate letters, no courtiers punished for flirtatious glances. A complete contrast to her husband Henry II, who loved Diane de Poitiers so much he gave her the royal seal. Catherine, in contrast, carried herself as though she was France, full of fractures, but never breaking. So was there truly no one on the sidelines of her life? Historians don't quite agree. You know how it goes. The more ambiguous the detail, the more it excites academic curiosity. Some later accounts hint that Catherine may have grown close to a few trusted advisors, particularly those who stood beside her during the darkest phases of the Civil War. But there's no concrete proof. A few names are frequently mentioned. 1. Cosimo Ruggieri, an Italian astrologer closely tied to Catherine in the years following the St. Bartholomew's massacre. Some say he was merely a fortune teller. Others claim he was a spy, a keeper of secrets, or a lover. They often met in private in small rooms where star charts were spread under pale candlelight, and whispers about the death of a king were written in ink made from ash and serpent tears. Sounds like a Gothic novel, doesn't it? But here's what truly chills people. Catherine had a small tower built in the gardens of the Tuileries just for Ruggieri to work in. A place where no one was allowed entry except her. And you know, when a queen builds a tower for one man, people are entitled to speculate. 2. Reine Le Florentin, a perfumer and herbalist. Reine was said to be the one who crafted Catherine's personal medicinal blends. From sleeping aids to rejuvenating tonics, to memory enhancers that sounded harmless, yet seemed to leave some of her rivals curiously weakened after sampling them a few times. No one knows if there was anything between Catherine and Reine beyond a mistress-servant dynamic. But Reine abruptly left Paris in 1573 without a word. Some said he knew too much. Others whispered that he had fallen in love with her. And Catherine. She never mentioned him again. What do you think? Pure professional loyalty or a secret relationship erased in silence? Another curious thing is though she had no recorded love affairs, Catherine was intensely sensitive to the emotions of others. She intervened forcefully in the romantic lives of her children, especially Marguerite, her daughter, who had a passionate love affair with Henri de Guise. Catherine blocked it at all costs, married Margot off to someone else, and made Henri disappear from court for a time. Some say she did it for politics. Others say Catherine was jealous. Not in the way a mother envies a daughter's poor choice in love, but in the way someone who has never been truly deeply romantically loved cannot bear to witness it in others. No one ever gave Catherine a love poem. No one ever sent her a trembling letter filled with longing. No one ever held her hand when the Paris rain began to fall. Yet she wrote the fates of lovers like a playwright, where she was the director, and they didn't know they'd already been cast. There is an old journal entry, author unknown, found in the Blois Library, written in archaic French. It speaks of a sleepless night in the Tuileries Palace, where the writer witnessed a shadowy figure in black walking the corridor at midnight, pausing before Catherine's room and then vanishing. The entry reads, "I heard no door, only the wind." But in the morning, the Queen smiled in a strange way. Whether that account is true or not, it offers something to ponder. Perhaps Catherine did love, but no one was ever allowed to know. Because if it were revealed, she would no longer be the one holding the blade. She would become someone who could be hurt. And for a queen who had lived her entire life through plots, wars, and betrayals, to be vulnerable was a luxury she could never afford. When people speak of the time of Catherine de Medici, they often remember the royal weddings, the bloody massacres, or the palace intrigues unfolding under candlelight in locked chambers. But there is another layer of reality without spotlight, without velvet, without a place in history books. It was the life of the common people. Those who bore no Valois name held no sword and received no secret letters. And you know what? They were the ones who suffered the real consequences of every political game. If you were born in a small village near Tours in 1570, you likely didn't know who the king was. Because during your childhood, the people only knew one thing: who was collecting taxes. And taxes came in many forms: salt tax, land tax, head tax, meat tax, bread tax, taxes on things you couldn't afford to buy. Sometimes the same tax was collected by both warring factions. One group of soldiers might come in the morning claiming they served the king. Another group arrived in the afternoon saying they acted in the name of God. There was no way to know who was telling the truth. But if you refused to pay, both sides might burn your house. People lived in terrifying uncertainty. Not uncertainty about the future, but about that very afternoon. Would you be dragged off to war? Had the windmill in the next village been burned down overnight? Would the boy in town, the one they said read a strange version of the Bible, be shot in the street? Every day passed like walking on thin ice. Religious war turned every city into a borderland between belief and fear. People hid Bibles in rafters, daughters in wine cellars, gold in bushes, and their true faith behind humble smiles. You attended Catholic Mass in the morning, then whispered Protestant prayers at night. Not because you lacked loyalty, but because you wanted to live long enough to tend your crops. Crops. Oh, right. Fields were left fallow, not from laziness, but because the man harvesting wheat might be mistaken for a spy from the other side. In one case, in a village near Lyon, a farmer was beaten to death in the marketplace simply for wearing a brown tunic, the color associated with local Huguenots. No one intervened. No one remembered his name afterward. Marketplaces slowly emptied. The sound of pigs squealing, clapping hands after a wine sale disappeared. Only the staggering boots of patrolling soldiers remained, and the quiet whimper of children begging for food when all that was left in the house were dried potato skins. The weather offered no kindness. Between 1570 and 1580, France saw waves of droughts and floods. Crops failed. Grain from Italy didn't arrive in time. Bread became a luxury, and the peasant staple sawdust porridge. You didn't mishear. People ground bark into powder, mixed it with water, flattened it into thin cakes, and baked them. They weren't tasty. They weren't nutritious. But they kept the stomach quiet for a night, and that was enough. Children grew up without schools, without baptisms, without a clear future. They only knew a few things. Don't trust strangers. Don't speak about religion in public. And never forget where the family is hiding in case of a raid. There was a curse whispered among mothers at the marketplace. May God let my child die young, so they won't have to grow up in this country. Painful to hear. Yes, but it was true. You might wonder, didn't the royal court do anything they did? They issued edicts. But paper doesn't stop swords. And edicts couldn't keep pace with the speed of hatred. People lost faith. They no longer trusted the king, or the nobles, or the priests appointed from above. They only trusted their neighbors until those neighbors disappeared without a trace. When Catherine passed through towns and provinces, there were cheering crowds, but also tightly shut doors, eyes that looked downward, trembling hands pulling sons back, away from the gaze of her armed escorts. Did she know how much the people were suffering? Yes. She received pleas for help, reports of falling tax revenues, accounts of empty marketplaces. But she couldn't stop the wars. She couldn't extinguish hatred generations deep. Historians still argue today, could Catherine have done something different to save the people? Some say she was powerless. Others say she simply didn't care as long as the throne remained intact. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps deep down, Catherine truly wanted peace. But even peace comes with a price too high, and those who pay it are always the ones whose names never appear in history. The laws under Catherine de' Medici, well, you might imagine them as a spider web coated in dust and gunpowder. They existed, they had structure, but touch them, and everything tangled. In theory, France still had royal laws, ancient codes from the Valois dynasty drafted in medieval times, complete with seals and handwritten copies on parchment. There were courts, judges, legal texts carefully copied in monasteries. But you know, when guns fired outside your door, who still heard the gavel in the courtroom? The law in Paris wasn't the same as in Toulouse. The law in Lyon could be altered by the Guise family. The law in Numps was reinterpreted by the Huguenots through a Protestant lens. One country, multiple sets of laws, one shared fear what was legal. Yesterday might be treason today. If you were a commoner, you didn't look for a lawyer. You looked for a protector, a lord with soldiers, a priest with influence, a wealthy widow who might hide you in her cellar. You committed a petty crime. Stole a chicken, argued at the market, disputed a land border. You could be whipped, jailed, or thrown to soldiers to deal with. Some places use the breaking wheel or tongue clamps as if lies could be silenced with metal. Accused of heresy, well, no lawyer would dare defend you, because in that era, the law didn't need proof, only suspicion and a whisper. A woman arrested for hearing strange sounds during prayer. A boy dragged away for drawing a six-pointed star. A bookseller beheaded for selling an edition of the Bible without church commentary. Elsewhere, a Protestant fled after a Catholic court sentenced him in absentia. In another town, a priest was hanged by Huguenots in the street beneath a sign reading, "Spreading Superstition." Justice was no longer a scale, but a sword repainted every time power changed hands. And the most frightening thing, Catherine herself, the one with supreme power, did not believe in law. She believed in necessity, She once issued a decree banning torture of prisoners, then months later allowed enhanced measures to extract information from captured Huguenots. She once declared that all faiths have a place, but also signed orders to expel thousands of Protestants from royal territories just to appease the Catholic faction. Historians still debate, was Catherine an opportunist or a victim of a system too decayed to save? Maybe she wanted reform. Maybe she was only buying time. There's an anecdote recorded when a judge once asked Catherine whether justice should prioritize divine authority or secular rule. She simply replied, "Justice should prioritize silence, because the dead no longer file complaints." Chilling, isn't it? You see, the law in that era wasn't where the people went for fairness. It was where the nobility went to manipulate it. The wealthier the city, the more flexible the law. Have gold. You could buy a pardon. Have prestige. You could rewrite the charges. Have nothing. You could be called a heretic just for bowing at the wrong angle when passing a church. The Royal Library still holds a notebook by a court clerk from Tours in which he recorded unusual rulings. Some of these cases could make you want to pull the blanket over your head at night. A mother prosecuted for raising her child using the wrong Bible translation. A blacksmith burned because his breath smelled of tobacco, something only the Dutch use. A couple exiled for having no children after 3 years of marriage, clearly punished by God. Toward the end of her life, Catherine too grew weary of the system she was trying to hold together. She once proposed establishing a national court independent of both Catholic and Protestant factions, but the idea was fiercely opposed by both sides. Because everyone knew a France without favoritism was a France no one could fully control. And so the idea died young, like many others buried in a pile of unread letters beneath an oil lamp running low. If outside there were smoked swords and sawdust bread, then inside the Tuileries or the Louvre during Catherine's reign, the candles never went out. Not because they wished to illuminate glory, but because they feared the dark. Picture it while peasants starved from failed harvests, while war flared in the south inside the royal court. There were still banquets lasting 3 days and nights with Italian wine, Dutch cheese, Moroccan roses, and masked dances performed by young nobles. Sound heartless. But for the elite of that time, upholding court ritual was a way of preserving order, or at least preserving the illusion of order. Catherine understood that better than anyone. She hosted ballet de cour, the ancestor of court ballet, where dukes in powdered wigs danced around the queen like angels with ribbons. Once, to celebrate her son's birthday, she had a full-scale Roman warship constructed in the palace courtyard, complete with fake sailors launching fireworks into the Parisian sky. And then when the fireworks faded, everyone returned to their rooms and double-locked the doors. Because after every banquet came whispers, watching eyes, and little plans tucked into jewelry boxes. You see, court life was nothing like a fairy tale. No one trusted anyone. Everyone smiled. But no one slept well. In Catherine's household, around 2,300 people operated daily maids, seamstresses, tea brewers, servants, musicians, personal secretaries, guest list keepers, and of course, spies. There was a quiet joke that circulated through the cold stone corridors of the Louvre. Here even the walls have ears, and those ears file reports on you before you've washed your face in the morning. Catherine never ate a dish without knowing who prepared it. She never signed a document without burning a pinch of incense on the corner of the table to ward off bad energy. And she always kept a private drawer with updated astrological charts, refreshed weekly by her trusted seers. Sounds superstitious, maybe, but when you've survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 betrayals from within your own bloodline, and a letter from your child asking to escape your influence, then believing in the position of Saturn doesn't seem so foolish. Beyond ceremony, the royal household was a place of silent negotiations. Catherine had the double mirror room constructed where each side had its own entrance for secret meetings between her and her adversaries. No one else allowed. No records, no guards, only mirrors, candlelight, and threats whispered in Italian. Historians still don't know how many political decisions were truly made during official councils and how many were sealed during afternoon tea in the royal apartments. Because Catherine didn't believe in councils. She believed in the fragile balance between loyalty, greed, and fear. And she knew keeping those three things meant keeping the throne. But the price was isolation. Catherine once told a priest, "Here, if I were to collapse and die in my chamber, it might take 3 days before someone noticed, and that person would only be checking to make sure I was truly dead." Chilling, isn't it? Outside the palace, the people traded all sorts of rumors that Catherine kept a white snake to absorb poison each time she drank wine. That she had a black book listing the names of those fated to die under their star. That during feasts, if she clinked glasses with someone using her left hand, they would vanish by the next full moon. No one knew if any of it was true, but one thing was certain: no one dared to verify twice. And so, Catherine lived between string music and daggers, between wine goblets and secret letters, between velvet gowns and trembling hands each time she signed a new decree. She was at the center of everything, but also the one person not allowed a good night's sleep. If you think love in the royal court was anything like a fairy tale, then let me gently pull you back to reality with a paper fan steeped in the scent of conspiracy. In Catherine's court, there was no love, only strategy, only who slept with whom and for what purpose. Catherine was not a woman who lived by the heart. She lived by eyes, ears, and memory. She remembered who sat next to whom at supper, who looked at whom more than 3 times, who entered whose room after midnight and didn't come out until near dawn. Not out of jealousy, but calculation. You see, in a court fractured between Catholics and Protestants, between rival houses craving the crown and nobles desperate for funds, the only thing that still connected people was sex. Catherine understood this better than anyone. She orchestrated covert liaisons, never allowing the lovers to marry, but ensuring the bond served the interests of the crown. Some called it the art of pillow diplomacy. Others called it a web of desire. For instance, when she noticed a Bourbon noble leaning toward the Huguenot cause showing interest in a young lady from the Catholic Guise family, she didn't intervene. On the contrary, she invited both to a private supper and served wine laced with a mild stimulant. The result? A secret affair that lasted 3 months, just long enough for the neutral faction to gather intelligence from both sides. When the passion cooled, Catherine coincidentally arranged another betrothal, this time to a house with a strong military. And so it went: love, boredom, engagement, dissolution, as if the heart were the smallest pawn on the board. Even her son, King Charles X, was once maneuvered by Catherine through suggestions to grow closer to a handsome young noble whose father happened to govern a rebellious province. The result? A relationship that was intimate but undefined, which led to more lenient policies toward that region. Modern historians still debate whether it was a true affair or simply political softening via hormones. Of course, not everyone was so easily swayed. Some figures defied Catherine, like the Countess de Clermont, known for her disdain toward the Queen, and nearly paid with her life after a banquet Catherine hosted. She was mildly poisoned, survived, but lost her memory for 3 weeks. When she recovered, her political stance had shifted dramatically in favor of the crown. Coincidence, perhaps, or was it love distilled into liquid form? Even Catherine's own romantic entanglements were as murky as the Seine under midnight fog. Though she never officially remarried after her husband, King Henry II, died, many rumors swirled about her ambiguous relationship with her close advisor, Michel del Hospital. They dined in private, strolled together at night in secluded gardens, and exchanged handwritten letters containing passages a little too affectionate for courtly decorum, but she never made anything public. No one could confirm anything, and that was the true art. Catherine didn't need to be loved in order to be loved back. She only needed others to think they might win her affection. Have you ever met someone so seductive that no one dared touch them? Because no one knew whether it was an invitation or a trap that was Catherine de' Medici. A queen who could hold power with a glance, form alliances through emotions never spoken aloud, and defeat enemies with a whisper at midnight. Did you know in Catherine's household, people didn't whisper the names of their enemies? They whispered predictions of who would disappear next. And strangely enough, those predictions were often correct. Because everyone knew when Catherine was silent, it meant someone else was about to fall silent forever. In other words, she didn't need to kill. She created an environment where people either died on their own or were handled by someone else while her hands stayed clean. Catherine hated noise. She once said, "Beheading is an art for soldiers." But making someone cease to exist permanently, that is an art for rulers, an art crafted from poison, fear, and silence. In the palace, no one was surprised by reasonable deaths. A nobleman suddenly collapsed after a ball. The official cause was congenital heart condition. A young courtier disappeared after a private meeting. It was said he left Paris of his own accord, following a new faith. No one investigated, because no one lived long enough to do so. There was an unofficial list, a list of those who criticized the crown and then vanished. Baron de Bussy d'Amboise stabbed to death in a minor scuffle after publicly mocking Catherine. Marquis de Piennes poisoned shortly after leaking internal information to the Huguenots. A Protestant preacher named Francois disappeared after delivering a sermon criticizing the woman with a crown who prays to shadows. All had official explanations, but the survivors whispered the real reasons. Catherine didn't just use poison. She used choice. You opposed her. You weren't killed immediately. You were offered to switch sides, invited to dine, promised favor. And if you refused, well, you simply didn't wake up to see the light. Once a nobleman was found dead in a seated position as if asleep with a smile on his lips. No pain, no wounds. The servant said that hours earlier he had received a small pastry sent from the royal kitchen itself. No one asked why. No one dared taste the rest. Modern historians still debate Catherine's true involvement in these assassinations. Some claim most were mere rumors. Others, especially Italian scholars, say if she didn't give the order, she certainly didn't stop it. And that is even more terrifying. Catherine once hired a team of scent artisans. It sounded like a perfumery group, but in truth, they specialized in crafting oils, dyes, and slow-acting poisons. Tiny bottles labeled deep sleep essence, weakened digestion extract, or persistent cough tincture not enough to kill. In one night, but enough to make someone vanish within 3 weeks. Slow deaths, no trace. Death didn't arrive like a dagger, but like a lingering afternoon fever that never left. You hear the door creak open at night. You notice the wine glass looks slightly different than usual. You see the maid's gaze flicker past you, then immediately drop. You start coughing. You feel cold. You can't sleep. And then you're remembered as a kind soul taken too soon. Catherine didn't need to witness anyone's death. She only needed that person to no longer be a threat. An Italian diplomat once wrote back to Florence, "The fear of Catherine does not lie in the army she commands, but in her ability to make you wonder, am I the next one?" When she walked the palace halls, the air seemed to freeze. Her footsteps on the marble echoed like a countdown. And if she paused and looked at you for just a second, you'd pray it was simply a misdirected glance. There's a kind of silence more terrifying than the sound of a dagger in the corridor. It's when people stop fearing you. In the final years of her life, the woman who once made dukes shrink and princes hold their breath when entering a room now had to issue commands twice to be heard. And sometimes, no one listened at all. She aged rapidly. Each year she let go of a piece of jewelry that had once symbolized her power. She hosted fewer feasts, made fewer appearances, and the whispers began to spread. She's no longer the center. It was inevitable. Catherine had bet everything on her sons. And as you know, betting on your children is often the cruelest gamble. After the sudden death of King Charles X, the son she loved most, even though she had once forced him to sign the blood-soaked orders of St. Bartholomew's Day, Catherine placed all her hopes in Henri III. And Henri was a beautiful, intelligent child, but as soft as wax in the hands of others' power. Catherine once whispered to a trusted servant, "He has his mother's heart, but he wants to live through someone else's." Henri was mocked by nobles, distrusted by clergy, and watched over by Catherine like a child. She still attended council meetings, still made decisions. But more and more often, her directives were brushed aside by Henri. "He'll ask my personal advisor. Mother needs to rest. I want to make my own mark." 3 seemingly gentle phrases. But to Catherine, they were 3 slow cuts into the empire of intellect she had built over 40 years. By then, the major factions in France, the Guise, the Bourbon, the Cons, no longer came to Catherine for counsel. They came to inform her. A minor coup in the south, she was notified. A Protestant noble wishing to join court, she was invited to attend the reception. From master of the board, she was turned into a spectator of the final match. Catherine still resisted, still kept a cold face, a steady gaze. But after each meeting, she would sit alone for hours, staring into the emptiness beyond the window, where black birds circled above the Louvre roof. "They think him old," she once told an aging servant. "But I am not dead. I still remember every person who forgot me first. But memory doesn't win back loyalty. Nor does it save a lonely queen surrounded by people among whom none could be called an ally." In one of her final letters to her son, Henri III, Catherine wrote, "You will be the last king your mother tries to protect. From now on, I will only protect my soul." That sentence, if you read it carefully, may already have been a farewell. A few months later, Catherine fell ill on a cold winter night. No alarms were sounded. No palace guards raced to spread the word. Just the next morning, she didn't rise as usual. And it wasn't until midday that someone knocked on her door. Henri III did not visit. He only sent a priest and a short letter, "Mother, pray for France." One line for the woman who once held all of France in her hands. Catherine died in her private chamber at the Château de Blois in January 1589. No wailing, no grand mourning ceremonies, just a simple record. The Queen Mother has passed away in silence. Silence of a strange kind, as if she had foreseen it, as if Catherine herself had chosen to leave without inflicting one more wound upon France. You might think surely the court would hold a grand funeral. After all, she was the mother of 3 kings. After all, she was the one who held the country together through decades of near collapse. But no, there was no proper funeral, no mourning procession from Parliament, no envoys from other kingdoms offering condolences. Why? Because at that very moment, Henri III, her surviving son, had just been driven out of Paris. The entire monarchy was trembling under the weight of civil war between radical Catholics and the Huguenot forces. Everyone was busy saving their seats, saving their necks. No one had time to mourn Catherine. Her death was like the final curtain falling on an empty stage. A play that reached its end after the audience had already gone home. Catherine's body was not buried immediately. Historians recorded that she was left in a small chapel in Blois for nearly a month. Why? There were no funds to transport the coffin to Paris, no one with the authority to organize a state funeral. And some feared that burying her might become an excuse for rebellious factions to make a move. Imagine this. A woman who once decided the fate of millions, now lying quietly in a cold, damp chamber during the French winter. No wreaths, no drums, only wind whistling through the window panes. Sounds heartbreaking, or perhaps sounds exactly like Catherine. Arriving in silence, leaving in silence, but leaving behind tremors that would echo for centuries. There's one final twist of irony. Henri III, her last surviving son, was assassinated just a few months later. And with his death, the Valois dynasty that Catherine fought so fiercely to preserve officially ended. France entered the era of the Bourbon, a new dynasty, a new way of telling history. And Catherine became a name people invoked only when speaking of manipulation, blood, or fortune-telling. Centuries later, the debates continue. Was she a ruthless woman, or simply a victim of circumstance? Did she truly believe in astrology, or was it a tool of political power? How many deaths bore her fingerprints, and how many were only rumors? Historians still don't agree. Books remain polarized. Either she's the nightmare of moral conscience or the symbol of female intellect in a time of chaos. But one thing is certain, no one denies, that Catherine de' Medici was dangerous in the quietest possible way. A woman born without a crown, without an army, without official power, yet who ruled over the greatest court in Europe for nearly half a century. Not with force, but with psychology, with patience, and with the power to make people doubt themselves. Have you found yourself lost in her labyrinth yet? Sleep well, and if you've made it this far and still aren't sleepy, perhaps Catherine is still lingering somewhere in this story, smiling faintly, waiting for you to close your eyes so she can whisper the next chapter. Good night. We'll meet again in tomorrow night's tale, where another throne carries the shadow of power and solitude.